The contents of the chapter 1 are India in the 18th century, decay of the Mughal Empire, Indian states and society, Hyderabad and the Carnatic, Bengal, Awadh, Mysore, Kerala, areas around Delhi, Bangash Pathans and Rohillas, the Sikhs, the rise and fall of the Maratha powers, social and economic conditions of the people, education, social and cultural life. Chapter 1 India in the 18th century. Decay of the Mughal Empire. The great Mughal Empire, the envy of its contemporaries, for almost 2 centuries, declined and disintegrated during the first half of the 18th century. The Mughal emperors lost their power and glory, and their empire shrank to a few square miles around Delhi. In the end, in 1803, Delhi itself was occupied by the British army, and the proud Mughal emperor was reduced to the status of a mere pensioner of a foreign power. The unity and stability of the empire had been shaken during the long and strong reign of Aurangzeb. Yet, in spite of his many harmful policies, the Mughal administration was still quite efficient, and the Mughal army strong at the time of his death in 1707. Moreover, the Mughal dynasty still commanded respect in the country. On Aurangzeb's death, his 3 sons fought among themselves for the throne. The 65-year-old Bahadur Shah emerged victorious. He was learned, dignified, and there was evidence of the reversal of some of the narrow-minded policies and measures adopted by Aurangzeb. He adopted a more tolerant attitude towards the Hindu chiefs and rajas. There was no destruction of temples in his reign. In the beginning, he made an attempt to gain greater control over the Rajput states of Ambar and Marwar, Jodhpur, by replacing Jai Singh by his younger brother Vijay Singh at Ambar, and by forcing Ajit Singh of Marwar to submit to the Mughal authority. He also made an attempt to garrison the cities of Ambar and Jodhpur. This attempt was, however, met with firm resistance. This may have made him recognize the folly of his actions, for he soon arrived at a settlement, though not a famous one, with the 2 states. Though their states were restored to the Rajas Jai Singh and Ajit Singh, their demand for high mansabs, ranks, and the offices of subedars of important provinces such as Malwa and Gujarat was not accepted. His policy towards the Maratha sardars, chiefs, was that of half-hearted conciliation. While he granted them the Sardesh Mukhi of the Deccan, he failed to grant them the Chauth, thus failing to satisfy them fully. Also, he did not recognize Shahu as the rightful Maratha king. He thus let Tarabai and Shahu fight for supremacy over the Maratha kingdom. The result was that Shahu and the Maratha Sardars remained dissatisfied, and the Deccan continued to be a prey to disorder. There could be no restoration of peace and order so long as the Maratha Sardars fought one another as well as fought against Mughal authority. Bahadur Shah had tried to conciliate the rebellious Sikhs by making peace with Guru Gobind Singh and giving him a high mansab. But when, after the death of the Guru, the Sikhs once again raised the banner of revolt, in the Punjab under the leadership of Banda Bahadur. The emperor decided to take strong measures and himself led a campaign against the rebels, who controlled practically the entire territory between the Satluj and the Jamuna, reaching the close neighborhood of Delhi. Even though he succeeded in capturing Lohgar, a fort built by Guru Gobind Singh northeast of Ambala at the foothills of the Himalayas, and other important Sikh strongholds, the Sikhs could not be crushed, and in 1712 they recovered the fort of Lohgar. Bahadur Shah made peace with Chhatrasal, the Bundela chief, who remained a loyal feudatory, and the Jat chief Choraman, who joined him in the campaign against Banda Bahadur. There was further deterioration in the field of administration in Bahadur Shah's reign. The position of state finances worsened as a result of his reckless grants of jagirs and promotions. During his reign, the remnants of the royal treasure, amounting in 1707 to some 13 crore of rupees, were exhausted. Bahadur Shah was groping towards a solution to the problems besetting the empire. Given time, he might have revived the imperial fortunes. Unfortunately, his death in 1712 plunged the empire once again into civil war. A new element entered Mughal politics in this and the succeeding wars of succession. While previously the contest for power had been between royal princes, and the nobles had merely aided the aspirants to the throne, now ambitious nobles became direct contenders for power and used princes as mere pawns to capture the seats of authority. In the civil war following Bahadur Shah's death, one of his less able sons, Jahandar Shah, won because he was supported by Zulfikar Khan, the most powerful noble of the time. Jahandar Shah was a weak and degenerate prince who was wholly devoted to pleasure. He lacked good manners, dignity, and decency. During Jahandar Shah's reign, the administration was virtually in the hands of the extremely capable and energetic Zulfikar Khan, who had become his wazir. Zulfikar Khan believed that it was necessary to establish friendly relations with the Rajput Rajas and the Maratha Sardars, and to conciliate the Hindu chieftains in order to strengthen his own position at the court and to save the empire. Therefore, he rapidly reversed the policies of Aurangzeb. The hated jizya was abolished. Jai Singh of Ambar was given the title of Mirza Raja Savai and appointed governor of Malwa. Ajit Singh of Marwar was awarded the title of Maharaja and appointed governor of Gujarat. Zulfikar Khan confirmed the earlier private arrangement that his deputy in the Deccan, Daud Khan Panni, had concluded with the Maratha king Shahu in 1711. By this arrangement, the Maratha ruler was granted the Chauth and Sardesh Mukhi of the Deccan on the condition that these collections would be made by the Mughal officials and then handed over to the Maratha officials. Zulfikar Khan also pacified Churaman Jat and Chhatrasal Bundela. Only towards Banda and the Sikh did he continue the old policy of suppression. Zulfikar Khan made an attempt to improve the finances of the empire by checking the reckless growth of jagirs and offices. He also tried to compel the Mansabdars, nobles, to maintain their official quota of troops, An evil tendency encouraged by him was that of ijara or revenue farming. Instead of collecting land revenue at a fixed rate as under Todermal's land revenue settlement, the government began to contract with revenue farmers and middlemen to pay the government a fixed amount of money while they were left free to collect whatever they could from the peasant. This led to increased oppression of the peasant. Many jealous nobles secretly worked against Zulfikar Khan. Worse still, the emperor too did not give him his trust and cooperation in full measure. The emperor's ears were poisoned against Zulfikar Khan by unscrupulous favorites. He was told that his wazir was becoming too powerful and ambitious and might even overthrow the emperor himself. The cowardly emperor dared not dismiss the powerful wazir, but he began to intrigue against him secretly. Nothing could have been more destructive to healthy administration. Jahandar Shah's inglorious reign came to an early end in January 1713 when he was defeated at Agra by Farooq Siyar, his nephew. Farooq Siyar owed his victory to the Sayyid brothers, Abdullah Khan and Hussein Ali Khan Barahau, who were therefore given the offices of Wazir and Mir Bakshi respectively. The two brothers soon acquired dominant control over the affairs of the state. Farooq Siyar lacked the capacity to rule. He was cowardly, cruel, undependable, and faithless. Moreover, he allowed himself to be influenced by worthless favorites and flatterers. In spite of his weaknesses, Farooq Siyar was not willing to give the Sayyid brothers a free hand but wanted to exercise personal authority. On the other hand, the Sayyid brothers were convinced that administration could be carried on properly, the decay of the empire checked, and their own position safeguarded only if they wielded real authority and the emperor merely reigned without ruling. Thus there ensued a prolonged struggle for power between the Emperor Farooq Siyar and his Wazir and Mir Bakshi. Year after year, the ungrateful emperor intrigued to overthrow the two brothers. Year after year, he failed. In the end, in 1719, the Sayyid brothers deposed and killed him. In his place, they raised to the throne in quick succession two young princes who died of consumption. The Sayyid brothers now made the 18-year-old Muhammad Shah the Emperor of India. The three successors of Farooq Siyar were mere puppets in the hands of the Sayyids. Even their personal liberty to meet people and to move around was restricted. Thus, from 1713 until 1720, when they were overthrown, the Sayyid brothers wielded the administrative power of the state. The Sayyid brothers adopted the policy of religious tolerance. They believed that India could be ruled harmoniously only by associating Hindu chiefs and nobles with the Muslim nobles in governing the country. Again, they sought to conciliate and use the Rajputs and Marathas and the Jats in the struggle against Farooq Siyar and the rival nobles. They abolished the jizya immediately after Farooq Siyar's accession to the throne. Similarly, the pilgrim tax was abolished from a number of places. They won over to their side Ajit Singh of Marwar, Jai Singh of Ambar, and many other Rajput princes by giving them high positions of influence in the administration. They made an alliance with Choraman, the Jat chieftain. In the later years of their administration, they reached an agreement with King Shahu by granting him the Swaraj of Shivaji and the right to collect the Chauth and Sardeshmukhi of the 6 provinces of the Deccan. In return, Shahu agreed to support them in the Deccan with 15,000 mounted soldiers. The Said brothers made a vigorous effort to contain rebellions and to save the empire from administrative disintegration. They failed in these tasks mainly because they were faced with constant political rivalry, quarrels, and conspiracies at the court. This continued friction in the ruling circles disorganized and even paralyzed administration at all levels. Lawlessness and disorder spread everywhere. The financial position of the state deteriorated rapidly as zamindars and rebellious elements refused to pay land revenue. The officials misappropriated state revenues and the central income declined because of the spread of revenue farming. As a result, the salaries of the officials and soldiers could not be paid regularly, and the soldiers became indisciplined and even mutinous. Even though the Said brothers had tried hard to conciliate and befriend all sections of the nobility, a powerful group of nobles, headed by Nizamul Mulk and his father's cousin Muhammad Amin Khan, began to conspire against them. These nobles were jealous of the growing power of the two brothers. The deposition and the murder of Farooq Siyar frightened many of them. If the emperor could be killed, what safety was there for mere nobles? However, the murder of the emperor created a wave of public revulsion against the two brothers. They were looked down upon as traitors, persons who had not been true to their salt, Namak-haram. Many of the nobles of Aurangzeb's reign also disliked the Said's alliance with the Rajput and the Maratha chiefs and their liberal policy towards the Hindus. These nobles declared that the Saids were following anti-Mughal and anti-Islamic policies. They thus tried to arouse the fanatical sections of the Muslim nobility against the Said brothers. The anti-Said nobles were supported by Emperor Muhammad Shah, who wanted to free himself from the control of the two brothers. In 1720, they succeeded in treacherously assassinating Hussein Ali Khan, the younger of the two brothers. Abdullah Khan tried to fight back but was defeated near Agra. Thus ended the domination of the Mughal Empire by the Said brothers, known in Indian history as the Kingmakers. Muhammad Shah's long reign of nearly 30 years, 1719 to 48, was the last chance of saving the empire. There were no quick changes of imperial authority as there were in the period 1707 to 20. When his reign began, Mughal prestige among the people was still an important political factor. The Mughal army and particularly the Mughal artillery was still a force to reckon with. Administration in northern India had deteriorated but not broken down yet. The Maratha Sardars were still confined to the south, while the Rajput Rajas continued to be loyal to the Mughal dynasty. A strong and far-sighted ruler supported by a nobility conscious of its peril might still have saved the situation. But Muhammad Shah was not the man of the moment. He was weak-minded and frivolous and overfond of a life of ease and luxury. He neglected the affairs of the state. Instead of giving full support to able wazirs such as Nizamul Mulk, he fell under the evil influence of corrupt and voteless flatterers and intrigued against his own ministers. He even shared in the bribes taken by the favorite courtiers. Disgusted with the fickle-mindedness and suspicious nature of the emperor and the constant quarrel at court, Nizamul Mulk, the most powerful noble of the time, decided to pursue his own ambition. He had become the wazir in 1722 and had made a vigorous attempt to reform the administration. He now decided to leave the emperor and his empire to their fate and to strike out on his own. He relinquished his office in October 1724 and marched south to found the state of Hyderabad in the Deccan. His departure was symbolic of the flight of loyalty and virtue from the empire. The physical breakup of the Mughal Empire had begun. The other powerful and ambitious nobles also now began to utilize their energies for carving out semi-independent states. Hereditary Nawabs, owning nominal allegiance to the emperor at Delhi, arose in many parts of the country. For example, in Bengal, Hyderabad, Awadh and the Punjab. Everywhere, petty zamindars, rajas and nawabs raised the banner of rebellion and independence. The Maratha Sardars began their northern expansion and overran Malwa, Gujarat and Bundelkhand. Then, in 1738, Nadir Shah, the ruler of Persia, Iran, descended upon the plains of northern India and the empire lay prostrate. Nadir Shah was attracted to India by the fabulous wealth for which it was always famous. Continual campaigns had made Persia virtually bankrupt. Money was needed desperately to maintain his mercenary army. Spoils from India could be a solution. At the same time, the visible weakness of the Mughal Empire made such plunder possible. He entered Indian territory towards the end of 1738 without meeting with any opposition. For years, the defenses of the northwest frontier had been neglected. The danger was not fully recognized till the enemy had occupied Lahore. Hurried preparations were then made for the defense of Delhi, but the faction-ridden nobles refused to unite even in sight of the enemy. They could not agree on a plan for defense or on the commander of the defending forces. Disunity, poor leadership, and mutual jealousies and distrust could lead only to defeat. The two armies met at Karnal on 13th February 1739 and the invader inflicted a crushing defeat on the Mughal army. The Emperor Muhammad Shah was taken prisoner and Nadir Shah marched on to Delhi. A terrible massacre of the citizens of the imperial capital was ordered by Nadir Shah as a reprisal against the killing of some of his soldiers. The greedy invader took possession of the royal treasury and other royal property, levied tribute on the leading nobles, and plundered the rich of Delhi. His total plunder had been estimated at 70 crores of rupees. This enabled him to exempt his own kingdom from taxation for 3 years. He also carried away the famous Kohinoor diamond and the jewel-studded peacock throne of Shah Jahan. He compelled Muhammad Shah to cede to him the provinces of the empire west of the river Indus. Nadir Shah's invasion inflicted immense damage on the Mughal Empire. It caused an irreparable loss of prestige and exposed the hidden weakness of the empire to the Maratha Sardars and the foreign trading companies. The central administration was thoroughly paralyzed. The invasion ruined imperial finances and adversely affected the economic life of the country. The impoverished nobles began to rack rent and oppress the peasantry even more in an effort to recover their lost fortunes. They also fought one another over rich jagirs and high offices more desperately than ever. The loss of Kabul and the areas to the west of the Indus once again opened the empire to the threat of invasions from the northwest. A vital line of defense had disappeared. It is surprising indeed that the empire seemed to revive some of its strength after Nadir Shah's departure, even though the area under its effective control shrank rapidly. But the revival was deceptive and superficial. After Muhammad Shah's death in 1748, bitter struggles and even civil war broke out among unscrupulous and power-hungry nobles. Furthermore, as a result of the weakening of the northwestern defenses, the empire was devastated by the repeated invasions of Ahmad Shah Abdali, one of Nadir Shah's ablest generals, who had succeeded in establishing his authority over Afghanistan after his master's death. Abdali repeatedly invaded and plundered northern India right down to Delhi and Mathura between 1748 and 1767. In 1761, he defeated the Marathas in the Third Battle of Panipat and thus gave a big blow to their ambition of controlling the Mughal emperor and thereby dominating the country. He did not, however, found a new Afghan kingdom in India. He and his successors could not even retain the Punjab, which they soon lost to the Sikh chiefs. As a result of the invasions of Nadir Shah and Abdali and the suicidal internal feuds of the Mughal nobility, the Mughal Empire had by 1761 ceased to exist in practice as an all-India empire. It remained merely as a kingdom of Delhi. Delhi itself was a scene of daily riot and tumult. The descendants of the Grand Mughals no longer participated actively in the struggle for the empire of India, but the various contenders for power found it politically useful to hide behind their name. This gave to the Mughal dynasty a long lease of life on the nominal throne of Delhi. Shah Alam II, who ascended the throne in 1759, spent the initial years as an emperor wandering from place to place and away from his capital. For he lived in mortal fear of his own wazir. He was a man of some ability and ample courage, but the empire was by now beyond redemption. In 1764, he joined Mir Qasim of Bengal and Shuja-ud-Dowla of Awadh in declaring war upon the English East India Company. Defeated by the British at the Battle of Buxar, he lived for several years at Allahabad as a prisoner of the East India Company. He left the British shelter in 1772 and returned to Delhi under the protective arm of the Marathas. The British occupied Delhi in 1803, and from that year till 1857, when the Mughal dynasty was finally extinguished, the Mughal emperor merely served as a political front for the English. In fact, the continuation of the Mughal monarchy after 1759, when it had ceased to be a military power, was due to the powerful hold that the Mughal dynasty had on the minds of the people of India as the symbol of the political unity of the country. The most important consequence of the decline of the Mughal Empire was that this enabled the British to conquer India. None of the Indian powers rose to claim the heritage of the Grand Mughals, for they were strong enough to destroy the empire, but not strong enough to unite it or to create anything new in its place. They could not create a new social order which could stand up to the new enemy from the west. All of them represented the same moribund social system as headed by the Mughals, and all of them suffered from the weaknesses which had destroyed the mighty Mughal empire. On the other hand, the Europeans knocking at the gates of India had the benefit of coming from societies which had evolved a superior economic system and which were more advanced in science and technology. The tragedy of the decline of the Mughal Empire was that its mantle fell on a foreign power which dissolved, in its own interests, the centuries-old socio-economic and political structures of the country and replaced it with a colonial structure. Indian states and society. With the gradual weakening and decline of the Mughal Empire, local and regional political and economic forces began to arise and assert themselves, and politics began to undergo major change from late 17th century onwards. During the 18th century, on the debris of the Mughal Empire and its political system, arose a large number of independent and semi-independent powers such as the Bengal, Awadh, Hyderabad, Mysore, and Maratha kingdoms. It is these powers which the British had to overcome in their attempt at supremacy in India. Some of these states, such as Bengal, Awadh, and Hyderabad, may be characterized as succession states. They arose as a result of the assertion of autonomy by governors of Mughal provinces with the decay of the central power. Others, such as the Maratha, Afghan, Jat, and Punjab states, were the product of rebellions by local chieftains, zamindars, and peasants against Mughal authority. Not only did the politics in the two types of states or zones differ to some extent from each other, but there were differences among all of them because of local conditions. Yet, not surprisingly, the overall political and administrative framework was very similar in nearly all of them. There was, of course, also a third zone comprising of areas on the southwest and southeast coasts and of northeastern India where Mughal influence had not reached in any degree. The rulers of all the 18th century states tried to legitimize their position by acknowledging the nominal supremacy of the Mughal emperor and by seeking his approval as his representatives. Moreover, nearly all of them adopted the methods and spirit of Mughal administration. The first group of states, succession states, inherited functioning Mughal administrative structure and institutions. Others tried to adopt and adapt in varying degrees this structure and institutions, including the Mughal revenue system. The rulers of these states established law and order and viable economic and administrative structures. They curbed, with varying degrees of success, the lower local officials and petty chiefs and zamindars who constantly fought with higher authorities for control over the surplus produce of the peasants, and who sometimes succeeded in establishing local centers of power and patronage. They also conciliated and recommended they also conciliated and accommodated these local chiefs and zamindars who desired peace and law and order. In general, there was in most of the states decentralization of political authority, with chiefs, jagirdars, and zamindars gaining in economic and political power. The politics of these states were invariably non communal or secular, the motivations of their rulers being similar in economic and political terms. These rulers did not discriminate on religious grounds in public appointments, civil or military, nor did the rebels against their authority pay much attention to the religion of the rulers. There is, therefore, little warrant for the belief that the decline and breakup of the Mughal Empire was followed by anarchy or breakdown of law and order in different parts of India. In fact, whatever anarchy in administration and economy existed in the 18th century usually followed British wars of conquest and British intervention in the internal affairs of the Indian states. None of these states, however, succeeded in arresting the economic crisis which had set in during the 17th century. All of them remained basically rent extracting states. The zamindars and jagirdars, whose number and political strength constantly increased, continued to fight over the income from agriculture, while the condition of the peasantry continued to deteriorate. While these states prevented any breakdown of internal trade and even tried to promote foreign trade, they did nothing to modernize the basic industrial and commercial structure of their states. This largely explains their failure to consolidate themselves or to ward off external attack. Hyderabad and the Carnatic. The state of Hyderabad was founded by Nizamul Mulk Asaf Jah in 1724. He was one of the leading nobles of the post-Aurangzeb era. He played a leading role in the overthrow of the Sayyid brothers and was rewarded with the viceroyalty of the Deccan. From 1720 to 1722, he consolidated his hold over the Deccan by suppressing all opposition to his viceroyalty and organizing the administration on efficient lines. From 1722 to 1724, he was the Wazir of the empire, but he soon got disgusted with that office as the Emperor Muhammad Shah frustrated all his attempts at reforming the administration. So, he decided to go back to the Deccan where he could safely maintain his supremacy. Here he laid the foundations of the Hyderabad state, which he ruled with a strong hand. He never openly declared his independence from the central government, but in practice he acted like an independent ruler. He waged wars, concluded peace, conferred titles, and gave jagirs and offices without reference to Delhi. He followed a tolerant policy towards the Hindus. For example, a Hindu, Puran Chand, was his diwan. He consolidated his power by establishing an orderly administration in the Deccan on the basis of the Jagirdari system on the Mughal pattern. He forced the big, turbulent zamindars to respect his authority and kept the powerful Marathas out of his dominions. He also made an attempt to rid the revenue system of its corruption. But after his death in 1748, Hyderabad fell in prey to the same disruptive forces as were operating at Delhi. The Carnatic was one of the Subhas of the Mughal Deccan and as such came under the Nizam of Hyderabad's authority. But just as in practice the Nizam had become independent of Delhi, so also the deputy governor of the Carnatic, known as the Nawab of Carnatic, had freed himself of the control of the viceroy of the Deccan and made his office hereditary. Thus, Nawab Sadatullah Khan of Carnatic had made his nephew Dost Ali his successor without the approval of his superior, the Nizam. Later, after 1740, the affairs of the Carnatic deteriorated because of the repeated struggles for its Nawabship, and this provided an opportunity to the European trading companies to directly interfere in Indian politics. Bengal. Taking advantage of the growing weakness of the central authority, two men of exceptional ability, Murshid Quli Khan and Alivardi Khan, made Bengal virtually independent. Even though Murshid Quli Khan was made governor of Bengal as late as 1717, he had been its effective ruler since 1700, when he was appointed its Diwan. He soon freed himself from central control, though he regularly sent large tribute to the emperor. He established peace by freeing Bengal of internal and external danger. Bengal was now also relatively free of major uprisings by zamindars. The only three major uprisings during his rule were first by Sitaram Ray, Uday Narayan and Ghulam Muhammad, and then by Shujat Khan, and finally by Najat Khan. After defeating them, Murshid Quli Khan gave their zamindaris to his favorite, Ramjivan. Murshid Quli Khan died in 1727 and his son-in-law Shujauddin ruled Bengal till 1739. In that year, Alivardi Khan deposed and killed Shujauddin's son, Sarfaraz Khan, and made himself the Nawab. These three Nawabs gave Bengal a long period of peace and orderly administration and promoted its trade and industry. Murshid Quli Khan effected economics in the administration and reorganized the finances of Bengal by transferring large parts of Jagir lands into Khalisa lands, by carrying out a fresh revenue settlement, and by introducing the system of revenue farming. He recruited revenue farmers and officials from local zamindars and merchant bankers. He also granted agricultural loans, the kavi, to the poor cultivators to relieve their distress as well as to enable them to pay land revenue in time. He was thus able to increase the resources of the Bengal government. But the system of revenue farming led to increased economic pressure on the zamindars and peasants. Moreover, even though he demanded only the standard revenue and forbade illegal cesses, collected the revenue from the zamindars and the peasants with utmost cruelty. Another result of his reforms was that many of the older zamindars were driven out and their place was taken by upstart revenue farmers. Murshid Quli Khan and the succeeding Nawabs gave equal opportunities for employment to Hindus and Muslims. They filled the highest civil posts and many of the military posts with Bengalis, mostly Hindus. In choosing revenue farmers, Murshid Quli Khan gave preference to local zamindars and mahajans, moneylenders, who were mainly Hindus. He thus laid the foundations of a new landed aristocracy in Bengal. All the three Nawabs recognized that the expansion of trade benefited the people and the government, and therefore gave encouragement to all merchants, Indian and foreign. They provided for the safety of roads and rivers from thieves and robbers by establishing regular thanas and chowkis. They checked private trade by officials. They prevented abuse in the customs administration. At the same time, they made it a point to maintain strict control over the foreign trading companies and their servants and prevented them from abusing their privileges. They compelled the servants of the English East India Company to obey the laws of the land and to pay the same customs duties as were being paid by other merchants. Alivardi Khan did not permit the English and the French to fortify their factories in Calcutta and Chandannagar. The Bengal Nawabs proved, however, to be short-sighted and negligent in one respect. They did not firmly put down the increasing tendency of the English East India Company after 1707 to use military force or to threaten its use to get its demands accepted. They had the power to deal with the company's threats, but they continued to believe that a mere trading company could not threaten their power. They failed to see that the English company was no mere company of traders, but was the representative of the most aggressive and expansionist colonialism of the time. Their ignorance of and the lack of contact with the rest of the world was to cost the state dear. Otherwise, they would have known of the devastation caused by the Western trading companies in Africa, Southeast Asia, and Latin America. The Nawabs of Bengal neglected to build a strong army and paid a heavy price for it. For example, the army of Murshid Quli Khan consisted of only 2,000 cavalry and 4,000 infantry. Alivardi Khan was constantly troubled by the repeated invasions of the Marathas, and in the end he had to cede a large part of Orissa to them. And when in 1756-7 the English East India Company declared war on Siraj-ud-Dowla, the successor of Alivardi, the absence of the strong army contributed much to the victory of the foreigner. The Bengal Nawabs also failed to check the growing corruption among their officials. Even judicial officials, the Qazis and Muftis, were given to taking bribes. The foreign companies took full advantage of this weakness to undermine official rules and regulations and policies. Awadh. The founder of the autonomous kingdom of Awadh was Sadat Khan Burhan ul Mulk who was appointed governor of Awadh in 1722. He was an extremely bold, energetic, iron-willed, and intelligent person. At the time of his appointment, many rebellious zamindars had raised their heads everywhere in the province. They refused to pay the land tax, organized in their own private armies, erected forts, and defied the imperial government. For years, Sadat Khan had to wage war upon them. He succeeded in suppressing lawlessness and disciplining the big zamindars and thus increasing the financial resources of the government. He won over the chieftains and zamindars through various concessions. Moreover, most of the defeated zamindars were also not displaced. They were usually confirmed in their estates after they had submitted and agreed to pay their dues, land revenue, regularly. Sadat Khan also carried out a fresh revenue settlement in 1723. He is said to have improved the lot of the peasant by levying equitable land revenue and by protecting him from oppression by the big zamindars. Like the Bengal Nawabs, he too did not discriminate between Hindus and Muslims. Many of his commanders and high officials were Hindus, and he curbed refractory zamindars, chiefs, and nobles irrespective of their religion. His troops were well paid, well armed, and well trained. His administration was efficient. He too continued the Jagir system. Before his death in 1739, he had become virtually independent and had made the province a hereditary position. He was succeeded by his nephew Safdarjung, who was simultaneously appointed the Wazir of the Empire in 1748 and granted in addition the province of Allahabad. Safdarjung gave a long period of peace to the people of Awadh and Allahabad before his death in 1754. He suppressed rebellious zamindars, won over others, and made an alliance with the Maratha Sardars so that his dominion was saved from their incursions. He was able to win the loyalty of Rajput chieftains and Sheikhzadas. He carried on warfare against the Rohillas and the Bangash Pathans. In his war against the Bangash Pathans in 1750-51, he secured Maratha military help by paying a daily allowance of Rs 25,000 and Jat support by paying Rs 15,000 a day. Later, he entered into an agreement with the Peshwa by which the Peshwa was to help the Mughal Empire against Ahmad Shah Abdali and to protect it from such internal rebels as the Indian Pathans and the Rajput Rajas. In return, the Peshwa was to be paid Rs 50 lakhs, granted the Chauth of the Punjab, Sindh and several districts of northern India, and made the governor of Ajmer and Agra. The agreement failed, however, as the Peshwa went over to Safdarjung's enemies at Delhi, who promised him the governorship of Awadh and Allahabad. Safdarjung also organized an equitable system of justice. He too adopted a policy of impartiality in the employment of Hindus and Muslims. The highest post in his government was held by a Hindu, Maharaja Nawab Rai. The prolonged period of peace and of economic prosperity of the nobles under the government of the Nawabs resulted in time in the growth of a distinct Lucknow culture around the Awadh court. Lucknow, for long an important city of Awadh and the seat of the Awadh Nawabs after 1775, soon rivaled Delhi in its patronage of the art and literature. It also developed as an important center of handicrafts. Crafts and culture also percolated to towns under the patronage of local chieftains and zamindars. Safdarjung maintained a very high standard of personal morality. All his life he was devoted to his only wife. As a matter of fact, all the founders of the three autonomous kingdoms of Hyderabad, Bengal, and Awadh, namely Nizamul Mulk, Murshid Quli Khan, and Alivardi Khan, and Sadat Khan, and Safdarjung, were men of high personal morality. Nearly all of them led austere and simple lives. Their lives give lie to the belief that all the leading nobles of the 18th century led extravagant and luxurious lives. It was only in their public and political dealings that they resorted to fraud, intrigue, and treachery. Mysore. Next to Hyderabad, the most important power that emerged in South India was Mysore under Hyder Ali. The kingdom of Mysore had preserved its precarious independence ever since the end of the Vijayanagar Empire and had been only nominally a part of the Mughal Empire. Early in the 18th century, two ministers, Nanjaraj, the Sarvadhikari, and Devraj, the Dulwai, had seized power in Mysore, reducing the king Chikka Krishnaraj to a mere puppet. Hyder Ali, born in 1721 in an obscure family, started his career as a petty officer in the Mysore army. Though uneducated, he possessed a keen intellect and was a man of great energy, daring, and determination. He was also a brilliant commander and a shrewd diplomat. Hyder Ali soon found his opportunity in the wars which involved Mysore for more than 20 years. Cleverly using the opportunities that came his way, he gradually rose in the Mysore army. He soon recognized the advantages of Western military training and applied it to the troops under his own command. He established a modern arsenal in Dindigal in 1755 with the help of French experts. In 1761, he overthrew Nanjaraj and established his authority over the Mysore state. He extended full control over the rebellious polygars, warriors, chieftains, and zamindars, and conquered the territories of Bidnor, Sunda, Sera, Kanara, and Malabar. A major reason for his occupation of Malabar was the desire to have access to the Indian Ocean. Though illiterate, he was an efficient administrator. He was responsible for introducing the Mughal administrative and revenue system in his dominions. He took over Mysore when it was a weak and divided state and soon made it one of the leading Indian powers. He practiced religious toleration, and his first Diwan and many other officials were Hindus. Almost from the beginning of the establishment of his power, he was engaged in wars with the Maratha Sardars, the Nizam, and the British. In 1769, he repeatedly defeated the British forces and reached the walls of Madras. He died in 1782 in the course of the Second Anglo-Mysore War and was succeeded by his son Tipu. Sultan Tipu, who ruled Mysore till his death at the hands of the British in 1799, was a man of complex character. He was, for one, an innovator. His desire to change with the times was symbolized in the introduction of a new calendar, a new system of coinage, and new scales of weights and measures. His personal library contained books on such diverse subjects as religion, history, military, science, medicine, and mathematics. He showed a keen interest in the French Revolution. He planted a tree of liberty at Srirangapattam, and he became a member of a Jacobean club. His organizational capacity is borne out by the fact that in those days of general indiscipline among Indian armies, his troops remained disciplined and loyal to him to the last. He tried to do away with the custom of giving jagirs and thus increase state income. He also made an attempt to reduce the hereditary positions of the polygars and to eliminate the intermediaries between state and the cultivator. However, his land revenue was as high as that of other contemporary rulers. It ranged up to one-third of the gross produce. But he checked the collection of illegal cesses, and he was liberal in granting permissions. His infantry was armed with muskets and bayonets in the European fashion, which were, however, manufactured in Mysore. He also made an effort to build a modern navy after 1796. For this purpose, he established two dockyards, the models of the ships being supplied by the Sultan himself. In personal life, he was free from vices and kept himself free from luxury. He was recklessly brave and, as a commander, brilliant. He was fond of saying that it was, quote, better to live a day as a lion than a lifetime as a sheep, unquote. He died fighting at the gates of Srirangapattam in pursuance of this belief. He was, however, hasty in action and unstable in nature. As a statesman, he more than any other 18th century Indian ruler recognized to the full extent the threat that the English posed to South India as well as to other Indian powers. He stood forth as the steadfast foe of the rising English power. The English, in turn, looked upon him as their most dangerous enemy in India. Though not free from contemporary economic backwardness, Mysore flourished economically under Hyder Ali and Tipu, especially when seen in contrast with its immediate past or with the rest of the country. When the British occupied Mysore after defeating and killing Tipu in 1799, they were surprised to find that the Mysore peasant was much more prosperous than the peasant in British-occupied Madras. Sir John Shore, Governor General from 1793 to 1798, wrote later that, quote, the peasantry of his dominions are protected and their labor encouraged and rewarded, unquote. Another British observer wrote of Tipu's Mysore as, quote, well cultivated, populous with industrious inhabitants, cities newly founded, and commerce extending, unquote. Tipu also seems to have grasped the importance of modern trade and industry. In fact, alone among the Indian rulers, he understood the importance of economic strength as the foundation of military strength. He made some attempts to introduce modern industries in India by importing foreign workmen as experts and by extending state support to many industries. He sent emissaries to France, Turkey, Iran, and Pegu, Myanmar to develop foreign trade. He also traded with China. He even tried to set up a trading company on the pattern of European companies and thus sought to imitate their commercial practices. He tried to promote trade with Russia and Arabia by setting up state trading institutions in the port towns. Some British historians have described Tipu as a religious fanatic, but this is not borne out by facts. Though he was orthodox in his religious views, he was in fact tolerant and enlightened in his approach towards other religions. He gave money for the construction of the image of goddess Sarda in the Sringeri temple after the latter was looted by Maratha horsemen in 1791. He regularly gave gifts to this temple as well as several other temples. The famous temple of Sri Ranganath was situated barely 100 yards from his palace. But while he treated the vast majority of his Hindu and Christian subjects with consideration and tolerance, he was harsh on those Hindus and Christians who might directly or indirectly aid the British against Mysore. Kerala. At the beginning of the 18th century, Kerala was divided up among a large number of feudal chiefs and rajas. The four most important states were those of Calicut under the Jamorin, Chirakkal, Cochin, and Travancore. The kingdom of Travancore rose into prominence after 1729 under King Martanda Varma, one of the leading statesmen of the 18th century. The combined rare foresight and strong determination with courage and daring. He subdued the feudatories, conquered Quilon and Eliadam, and defeated the Dutch, thus ending their political power in Kerala. He organized a strong army on the Western model with the help of European officers and armed it with modern weapons. He also constructed a modern arsenal. Martanda Varma used his new army to expand northwards, and the boundaries of Travancore soon extended from Kanyakumari to Cochin. He undertook many irrigation works, built roads and canals for communication, and gave active encouragement to foreign trade. By 1763, all the petty principalities of Kerala had been absorbed or subordinated by the three big states of Cochin, Travancore, and Calicut. Hyder Ali began his invasion of Kerala in 1766 and in the end annexed northern Kerala up to Cochin, including the territories of the Jamorin of Calicut. The 18th century saw a remarkable revival in Malayalam literature. This was due in part to the Rajas and chiefs of Kerala, who were great patrons of literature. Trivandrum, the capital of Travancore, became in the second half of the 18th century a famous center of Sanskrit scholarship. Rama Varma, successor of Martanda Varma, was himself a poet, scholar, musician, renowned actor, and a man of great culture. He conversed fluently in English, took a keen interest in European affairs, and regularly read newspapers and journals published in London, Calcutta, and Madras. Areas around Delhi. The Rajput states. The principal Rajput states took advantage of the growing weakness of Mughal power to virtually free themselves from central control, while at the same time increasing their influence in the rest of the empire. In the reigns of Farooq Siyar and Muhammad Shah, the rulers of Ambar and Marwar were appointed governors of important Mughal provinces such as Agra, Gujarat, and Malwa. The Rajputana states continued to be as divided as before. The bigger among them expanded at the cost of their weaker neighbors, Rajput and non-Rajput. Most of the larger Rajput states were constantly involved in petty quarrels and civil wars. The internal politics of these states were often characterized by the same type of corruption, intrigue, and treachery as prevailed at the Mughal court. Thus, Ajit Singh of Marwar was killed by his own son. The most outstanding Rajput ruler of the 18th century was Raja Savai Jai Singh of Ambar, 1681 to 1743. He was a distinguished statesman, lawmaker, and reformer. But most of all, he shone as a man of science in an age when Indians were oblivious of scientific progress. He founded the city of Jaipur and made it a great seat of science and art. Jaipur was built upon strictly scientific principles and according to a regular plan. Its broad streets are intersected at right angles. Jai Singh was, above everything, a great astronomer. He erected observatories with accurate and advanced instruments, some of them of his own invention, at Delhi, Jaipur, Ujjain, Varanasi, and Mathura. His astronomical observations were remarkably accurate. He drew up a set of tables entitled Jiz Muhammad Shahi to enable people to make astronomical observations. He had Euclid's Elements of Geometry translated into Sanskrit, as also several works on trigonometry, and Napier's work on construction and use of logarithms. Jai Singh was also a social reformer. He tried to enforce a law to reduce the lavish expenditure which the Rajputs had to incur on their daughters' weddings. This had given rise to the evil practice of infanticide. This remarkable prince ruled Jaipur for nearly 44 years from 1699 to 1743. The Jats. The Jats, a caste of agriculturists, lived in the region around Delhi, Agra, and Mathura. Jat peasants around Mathura revolted under the leadership of their Jat zamindars in 1669 and then again in 1688. These revolts were crushed, but the area remained disturbed. After the death of Aurangzeb, they created disturbances all around Delhi. Though originally a peasant uprising, the Jat revolt, led by zamindars, soon became predatory. They plundered all and sundry, the rich and the poor, the Jagirdars and the peasants, the Hindus and the Muslims. They took active part in the court intrigues at Delhi, often changing side to suit their own advantage. The Jat state of Bharatpur was set up by Churaman and Badan Singh. Jat power reached its highest glory under Surajmal, who ruled from 1756 to 1763, and who was an extremely able administrator and soldier and a very wise statesman. He extended his authority over a large area which extended from the Ganga in the east to the Chambal in the south, the Suba of Agra in the west to the Suba of Delhi in the north. His state included, among other, the districts of Agra, Mathura, Meerut, and Aligarh. He tried to lay the foundations of an enduring state by adopting the Mughal revenue system. A contemporary historian has described him as follows. Though he wore the dress of a farmer and could speak only his own Braj dialect, he was the Plato of the Jat tribe. In prudence and skill and ability to manage the revenue and civil affairs, he had no equal among the grandees of Hindustan except Asaf Jah Bahadur. After his death in 1763, the Jat state declined and was split up among petty zamindars, most of whom lived by plunder. Bangash Pathans and Rohilas. Muhammad Khan Bangash, an Afghan adventurer, established his control over the territory around Farrukhabad, between what are now Aligarh and Kanpur, during the reigns of Farooq Siyar and Muhammad Shah. Similarly, during the breakdown of administration following Nadir Shah's invasion, Ali Muhammad Khan carved out a separate principality known as Rohilkhand at the foothills of the Himalayas between the Ganga in the south and the Kumaon hills in the north, with its capital at first at Aulan in Bareilly and later at Rampur. The Rohillas clashed constantly with Awadh, Delhi and the Jats.